The trial of a black man in rural Alabama is seen through the eyes of his attorney's young daughter in the well-known 1963 film To Kill a Mockingbird, based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Harper Lee of the same name. And that's the movie we'll be digging into this week on Movie Bones. Hello, folks. My name is Justin Miller, and this is Movie Bones. And here's my co-host, Ryan, as usual. Hey, Ryan.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. And this week's film is the 1963 film To Kill a Mockingbird, starring Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch, Mary Badham as Scout, Philip Alford as Jem, Brock Peters as Tom Robinson, Estelle Evans as Calpurnia, and James Anderson as Bob Ewell. The story surrounds a family in rural Alabama during the Depression era. This little girl, her name's Scout, and her father is a lawyer in town in this rural area. And the first half of the film concerns itself with kind of setting up the life that they live there and also the circumstances that are happening gradually to her father being drawn into a case where he's called to defend a black man accused of rape of a white woman. And the story proceeds through the daughter's point of view of the conflict that starts to get set up because of the situation in the South at the time. It's a very well-known book and a very well-known adaptation of that book. And shockingly enough, I had never seen this or read this before. It's a hole in my pop culture lexicon. And I'm really glad to finally get this filled, Ryan, because this is a really wonderful film.
It is. Very much is. It is a wonderful story. I want to make a quick little pause here before I say anything else further. I only recognize, people out there that listen to this, I only recognize To Kill a Mockingbird as a standalone story. I will not ever have a conversation about her second book that I refuse to even name because, yes. But Atticus Finch is one of my favorite characters of all time.
How would you describe him? Because everything is told, let me put it this way. Everything in the film is taken through Scout's, his daughter's point of view. You'll see Gregory Peck, as the man's lawyer, go off and try to do the X, Y, or Z related to the case, but you don't necessarily follow him. His daughter and her brother, they'll go follow and they'll maybe listen in, but you don't get to hear everything that's going on. It's from Gregory Peck's perspective. It does provide a more innocent view, and some people have criticized it for taking a slightly too innocent view of the situation in the South. And I get where they're coming from to a degree, although I don't think that's where the film's main point lays. But by taking it through the innocent eyes of his daughter, the film it kind of draws the audience into, I don't know how to put this, but there are some larger moral considerations to think about. And we'll get into that. But I think, yes, Gregory Peck's performance is spot on. It's one of the best performances of his career, as far as I've seen of his film so far. Yeah, I was just really impressed with that. And also the cinematography, too. I think you're starting to see some of the early 60s cinematography get a little bit more experimental during this time period. And it's an interesting transition between the 50s, which definitely have their aesthetics going. And then you have the 70s with cinematography that gets even more experimental still. But this is where you start to see this transition. I think that from a technical perspective, that's also a very interesting aspect of the film.
I agree. Real quick, have we done Breakfast at Tiffany's?
No, we have not.
Okay. We've talked about it, though, before.
Yeah, we have.
Do you know the connection between Breakfast at Tiffany's and To Kill a Mockingbird? Since you
is
said
it an
you
actor?
never
Is it like
Nope.
an actor connection or director?
No, it's actually not an extra connection. Since you said that you've never seen the movie or read the book, To Kill a Mockingbird was written by Harper Lee.
Yes.
Harper Lee was really good friends for a time, maybe all of her life, maybe all of their lives anyways, but was really good friends with Truman Capote, who is also the author of the novella
Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Okay.
And maybe one day we'll get into that and everything. It always gets to me because it's like, it shows how connected and small our world is.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
when you think about it, To Kill a Mockingbird, what all these things share as authors. it's just always a really neat
Well, yeah.
thing that happens in life and whatnot.
And I like hearing about stories of how creatives interact with each other and how those behind-the-scenes things end up influencing further some of the classics we've come to understand and to watch. And it's like, yeah, I love those little connection things.
Yeah.
Even some of the small ones sometimes. They don't have to be big ones. It's kind of like, the whole 7 things. It was the Kevin Bacon thing. Remember the Kevin Bacon meme? Do you remember that?
So it's like 6 degrees
6 degrees of
separation.
Kevin Bacon. That's it.
Yeah.
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's kind of like that, But and I've always been kind of interested in that stuff too. I did notice that the film has been criticized over time for having a white savior narrative. And even some critics like, Roger Ebert has pointed this out. And I understand why that can be troublesome. Although I think in this case, I think it might be a little bit misplaced because it's taken from the child's point of view. It's not supposed to be realistic that way. The scene in front of the courthouse where there's going to be a lynch mob for Atticus Finch because he's defending the guy and he's out standing in front of the jail cell. She and her brother go up and try to insert themselves between the mob and her father, and they kind of guilt just by their presence mostly. I didn't find it as cynical as Roger Ebert did. It's like, would that really happen? He seemed to think that his daughter was being a little too knowing in what she was doing, where I don't think she was. But at the same time, but it's mostly, for me, it all comes down to the idea of shame, right? And what causes people to be like the people who are, who do these things, who are doing these things in the South. I do think it comes from this deep sense of personal shame and having to have something else, or in this case, someone else, to take it out on. You haven't been successful enough, or you're too poor, or whatever else it is. But if you have someone else you can hate on, that kind of gives you permission. I think there was another movie I watched, was Mississippi Burning is another one, where this idea comes back into play. And that movie is definitely more of a gritty take on it, on racism in the South.
There's 2 things that I want to hit on here with 2 things that you just said. First is this idea, or not just this idea, this reality of the situation. And it's actually a conversation I've been having outside of this recently, and it's because of some work that I've been doing. This movie is set in the Depression era. Depression it's just a word that encompasses just everything about that time. And like in the Depression, I mean, we know what the Depression was. It was the time where the economy was wrecked. People were hit hard. Nobody, or very few people anyways, were quote unquote rich or well off enough to be just like okay all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just a lot of bad things happen. And oftentimes what happens is people get angry. This has been an issue all throughout history. People get angry. Is their anger valid? Yes, their anger is valid. Unfortunately, what happens is they don't have a way or a proper place to point that anger. And what winds up happening is it gets pointed at the wrong thing or the wrong people.
Yeah.
And in the Depression era in the South, you're coming off World War I. That's also going to do a lot of bad things for you.
Yeah.
You're in the Depression. You're about to dive into World War II. It seems like there's no out. Everything that there is, there's no out. So what do? Well, they're going to point their anger at maybe this isn't your fault, but hey, this is someone that we can point our anger to. In that time, in that world, it is definitely Black people, African American people. They are the scapegoat. Now, Who should you really be angry at? You should really be angry at the systems that are in place that have allowed this to happen. And by allowed this to happen, I mean allowed multiple wars to happen without trying to figure out a peaceful solution before that, or coming to a peaceful solution before that.
Or dealing with it before it got blown out of proportion, yeah.
Yeah. And also, maybe more importantly, for this particular time period, systems that have failed, causing there to be an economic collapse of epic proportions.
Yes.
Not just across the United States of America, but across the whole entire world.
Yeah.
That's not good. It's like if you look at Germany in prior to World War II, their economy was wrecked. They're going through all the same things that are going on in the Depression, except it's much worse for them because they got completely destroyed in that sense after World War I. And then this guy comes along and, all these angry, depressed people, he says, oh, hey guys, let's, this is this group's of people's fault. And they're just gullible enough to go, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Maybe if we get rid of all of them, things will get better.
Yeah.
Obviously, what happened there was a human atrocity of even equally epic proportions and whatnot.
And
so, yeah, people get angry. Oftentimes, their anger is valid when they've been deeply hurt. But unfortunately, people get pointed in the wrong direction. You see, like, this character that we're talking about that Scout looks at, and she gets them to go away because she inadvertently shames them. But why is he there? Well, it's not good. It's very inhumane what he's trying to do or what he's trying to help do. But you can pinpoint that kind of thinking back to what has happened already. Because in the first part of the film, he comes and he pays in what he can pay with, which is food. And she's told, don't acknowledge him again because,
whether it's racism or anti-Semitism, none of this is rational. This is all, and that's kind of what it goes to show too, is when you're dealing with people, it's like whether their shame is from the economic reasons or from the pain of that kind of suffering, none of this is justifiable. It's just, what it does tell you is that this is an irrational human thing that we have to deal with. And the movie isn't talking about would they actually have stopped the lynching of her father? Probably, and in reality, probably not. Because there's a certain point beyond which people's bloodlust gets so high because of the anger turns to bloodlust, and at that point it can't be turned off.
Yeah,
but it's all based on something that's completely irrational. But what Scout does is it does at least point the way that in some circumstances if you can get to the heart, if you can still relate to someone on any level at all. If there's a human being still in there that can relate to something that's still human, that can still have an effect.
One other point I want to hit on is this idea of this white savior trope.
Mm-hmm.
I have to, all the people that have ever said that, fundamentally disagree. Hardcore. Cannot stress enough how much I disagree with that, because this is historical fiction, meaning that this is a fictional story that took place in an actual historical time in America. There was no one that was going to attempt to save Tom Robinson's character, not in Alabama, not in the 30s and everything. That's why they came to Atticus, and Atticus has to grapple with that. He knows he's putting his career on the line. He knows he's putting his family's safety on the line. He knows he's doing a lot of things like that. A story like The Last Samurai, that would have been more in the white savior trope, because it's like, oh, we're just going to put him in this setting. That's not the case. Atticus is reacting to the world around him, and he's doing what is decent. It is unfortunate of how it all plays out, and it's unfortunate that anyone, and by anyone I'm talking about, I'm first and foremost talking about Tom Robinson's character and Atticus, are put in the position that they're put in. But I mean, no, this is not a white savior story. This is a historical story, or historical fiction story, about what it means to go against society, what it means to do the right thing.
Yes. Yeah. And here's where I go for the bigger issue the film tackles. Ultimately, Atticus Finch is someone who goes against, and this is what we all have to do, especially nowadays too. We have tribes. We still have tribes. Often they're political, but the idea is that you go against, you could be your family. What if you're the only person in your family who voted a particular way and it was very unpopular with the rest of your family? How would you feel? You're trying to do the right thing, and yet you get all this pressure to conform, because these are the people that you've grown up with. They may know them from other circumstances. You might lose risking their love or worse, your life. You might lose everything in some cases. So, but there are times that's necessary. This is where I wish we could watch A Man for All Seasons, because it does a lot of the same things. And that's another one of my favorite movies. And maybe we'll get to do it someday. But it's like the idea, I love stories where you're asked to put a principle above even your flesh and blood or your kin or anything else. It put everyone, even including in Atticus Finch's case, his own kids, his whole family becomes under threat because of this case, which he believes is a moral right and good, and he has to do it. That's what really makes it worthwhile for me. It's like the idea that he has to put himself in severe jeopardy amongst his own community. The people that he would otherwise just be going about peacefully, because no one would have bothered him if he hadn't taken the case. In fact, they even make it clear early on. It's like they think he's going to he's just going to wash his hands of it. He's going to go give a half effort on the case just so that the prosecution can win and let them have their lynching. That's what they want.
Yeah. And also, something you just pointed out too is the reason why the African American community embraces him is because, and again, this goes to the historicity of it. He humanizes them. He is willing to speak with them, all of them. He's willing to do so much with them that is, that's not treating them as less than, but treating them as equal people in an equal in a situation where, treating them as equal people as if this is an equal situation. Of course, we know it's not an equal situation because the deck is stacked against Tom Robinson from the get-go, from the very beginning. But he's treating these people who have been for so long said you are less than. He is sitting there saying, "No, you're not. You're not less than," and you see it all throughout the movie. Like that's the thing too is he tries to treat everybody that way, but.
And I don't want to conflate it with I don't want to say it's like I wouldn't even classify it as heroic. It's just the right thing, I don't want to say because it shouldn't be considered heroic to do these things, and it's not heroic. It's just the right thing to do, and sometimes the right thing to do means you have to pay a personal price for it, and immaterially speaking, whether it's your house or your status, your family sometimes can suffer. So all these things. It's like to be able to put truth and what is right and good above even your own life and the lives of those you love the most. And that to me is always going to be something that resonates more deeply than anything else about the film. But he stands in his principle of nonviolence too. It's like, I am not going to dignify. I'll look you square in the eye, but you're going to look me straight in the eye as I wiped your spit off my face,
Yep.
And I'm going to go home.
Love that scene.
Yeah, I love that. That's my favorite part. Yeah, that's my favorite scene.
I love that scene too because it's like if you want to take it to like the other side of this, to where it's like you wish he would kind of do something about it. It also is one of my personal favorite scenes, not just because of how he reacts. You see it, he wants to react, and when he starts stepping forward, the other guy steps back. And you can see the look of fear in his eyes, like, oh, I've actually maybe have pushed
him too far.
Pushed this too far. Of course, everything that character has done has already pushed this too far because he's the reason why all of these horrible things have happened in the movie. He's got blood on his hands, both in one way, physically and literally and metaphorically. He's got blood on his hands.
All good has to do is to be. It doesn't need champions and saviors. It just needs to be. If you be good, if you follow virtue, that's all the good has to be. It doesn't require you have to go out with a pitchfork and actual punch Nazis. That's not what we're called to do. As much as tempting as sometimes it's like, that's why we got Indiana Jones is a huge thrill, right? Because you get to see him punch Nazis. It's a cathartic thing. But in reality, you don't do that. Hopefully you don't go around punching people, even if I don't want violence at all. But you don't go looking for trouble. Because all good has to do, has to be. Because that turns the knife even deeper and hopefully eventually the point where someone repents. You hope someone changes the course of their life because you're not doing this to hurt them. They're just hurting themselves. So it gets a lot about human psychology right in ways that are really instructive. And the film is, for me, if the film's a classic at all, that's the reason why. Big, bold underline right there.
Yeah.
All right, folks, so that's our film this week. Next week, we'll be doing Mysterious Island, starring Michael Craig, John Greenwood, Michael Callan, Gary Merrill, Herbert Lom, Beth Rogan, and Percy Herbert from 1961. Looks like it's going to be another B-movie classic. So anything else you want to say, Ryan?
Yeah, I have one question for you.
Sure.
Do you know who played Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird?
I do. It's
It's for those of you that don't know, it is a young Robert Duvall.
Fantastic, man. Yeah, I didn't recognize him, and I saw him in the credits, and I didn't recognize him. But anyway, that's a nice little tidbit to end the show on. So I guess that's all there is to say is until next week, guys, have a good one.
Have a good one.
All right, folks. Bye-bye.